It all began in the spring of 2014 in a small town called Cedar Falls, nestled deep in the heart of Iowa. I was 26 years old at the time, working as a librarian at the local public library. My name is Rachel Bennett, and I had lived in Cedar Falls my entire life. The town was quiet, with a population that barely reached 5,000 people. Everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But everything changed when the clock arrived. The clock itself wasn't anything special to look at. It was an antique mantel clock, about 2 feet tall, made of dark mahogany wood with intricate carvings along its edges. The face of the clock was white porcelain, marked with Roman numerals, and its hands were thin and delicate, almost fragile-looking. The clock had belonged to my grandmother, Evelyn Carter, who passed away in early March of that year. She had left it to me in her will, along with a few other belongings. I remember the day I brought the clock home. It was April 12th, a Saturday afternoon. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle had been falling since morning. My apartment was on the second floor of a small building on Main Street, just a block away from the library. I placed the clock on the fireplace mantel in my living room, where it would be visible from almost every corner of the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just another family heirloom, something to remind me of my grandmother. That night, I wound the clock for the first time. Its ticking filled the silence of my apartment, a steady rhythm that seemed almost comforting. I went to bed around midnight, lulled by the sound of the clock's steady beat. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, feeling rested and ready for the day ahead. But when I glanced at the clock while making my morning coffee, I noticed something strange. The hands were frozen at exactly 3:33 a.m. At first, I thought the clock must have stopped because it needed to be wound again. That's what happens with old clocks, right? So I wound it up once more, and it started ticking again without any issues. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just old and finicky. But then it happened again the following night, and the night after that. Every single night, without fail, the clock stopped at 3:33 a.m. By the third night, I was starting to get uneasy. I couldn't figure out why the clock kept stopping at the same time. There was no logical explanation for it. The battery wasn't dead, and the mechanism seemed to be working fine during the day. I even took it to a clock repair shop in Des Moines, hoping they could find the problem. The repairman examined it thoroughly, but found nothing wrong. "It's a solid piece," he said, handing it back to me. "If anything, this clock is in better condition than most antiques I've seen." When I got home, I decided to do some research. I spent hours online reading forums and articles about haunted objects and mysterious clocks. I came across a few stories about clocks that stopped at specific times, but none of them matched what was happening with mine. Most of those stories involved clocks that stopped at the exact time of their owner's death. Mine, however, wasn't tied to any one person. It stopped at the same time every single night, regardless of whether anyone had died. Then, on April 21st, something happened that changed everything. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was sitting on my couch reading a book. The clock was ticking steadily behind me, its sound blending into the background noise of my apartment. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was my cousin Michael, calling from Chicago. His voice was shaky, and I could tell something was wrong before he even spoke. "Rachel," he said, his tone heavy with grief. "It's Uncle Henry. He passed away last night." Uncle Henry, my father's younger brother, had been battling cancer for nearly 2 years. While his death wasn't entirely unexpected, it still hit me hard. I hung up the phone and sat there in stunned silence, staring at the clock on the mantel. Without thinking, I glanced at the time. It was 9:15 p.m. But then I remembered something odd. Uncle Henry lived in Milwaukee, which was in the Central Time Zone, just like Cedar Falls. If he had passed away last night, as Michael said, what time would that have been? I grabbed my phone and did the math. Michael had called at 9 p.m. Central Time. Assuming he learned about Uncle Henry's death earlier that day, it was likely that Henry had passed away sometime late Monday night or early Tuesday morning. And then it hit me. Tuesday morning at 3:33 a.m. The exact time the clock had stopped. My stomach churned as I stared at the clock, its hands frozen once again at 3:33 a.m. Was it possible? Could the clock somehow know when someone in my family had died? I tried to shake off the thought, telling myself it was just a coincidence. After all, how could a clock predict, or even respond to, something as unpredictable as death? But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was something more to it. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with the clock. I started keeping a journal, documenting every instance it stopped at 3:33 a.m. I also began paying closer attention to news of deaths in the area, checking obituaries and listening to local gossip. To my horror, I discovered that the clock wasn't limited to my family. It stopped whenever anyone died, not just in Cedar Falls, but anywhere in the world. For example, on May 3rd, the clock stopped at 3:33 a.m. Later that day, I read in the newspaper that a young woman named Jennifer Moore had died in a car accident in Omaha, Nebraska. On May 14th, the clock stopped again. This time, it coincided with the death of an elderly man in Des Moines who had succumbed to pneumonia. Each time, the pattern was the same. The clock would stop at 3:33 a.m., and by the end of the day, I would learn about someone's passing. The worst part was that I couldn't turn it off. I tried winding it down completely, removing the pendulum, even unplugging it, though it didn't run on electricity. No matter what I did, the clock always resumed ticking within a few hours, only to stop again at the same time the following night. It was as if it had a mind of its own, defying logic and reason. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the clock's presence began to take its toll on me. I found myself dreading each night, knowing that the clock would inevitably stop at 3:33 a.m. I started having trouble sleeping, waking up in a cold sweat whenever I heard the faintest creak or groan in my apartment. Even during the day, I felt constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound. Things came to a head on June 7th, a date I'll never forget. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished dinner when I heard a knock at my door. Standing outside was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment below me. She looked pale and shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched her cane. "Rachel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help." Mrs. Thompson explained that her husband, Harold, had fallen ill earlier that week. He had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure and was now in hospice care. "I'm scared, dear," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to lose him, but I can feel it coming. Can you sit with me tonight? Just for a little while." I agreed, of course. We spent the next few hours talking about her life with Harold, their wedding, their children, their travels. By the time I returned to my apartment, it was nearly midnight. Exhausted, I collapsed onto my couch and fell into a restless sleep. But just before dawn, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. It sounded like something heavy had fallen off the mantel. I rushed into the living room and found the clock lying on the floor, its glass face shattered and its hands bent at awkward angles. For a moment, I thought it had finally broken for good. But then I noticed something strange. Despite the damage, the hands were still pointing to 3:33 a.m. And as I stood there, staring at the wreckage, the clock began ticking again. Later that morning, I received a call from Mrs. Thompson. Her voice was hollow, devoid of emotion. "Harold passed away last night," she said, "at 3:33 a.m. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain that my clock had known before either of us did? Instead, I offered my condolences and promised to visit her later that day. After that, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed the clock into a box and drove it to the local thrift store, hoping to get rid of it for good. But fate had other plans. 2 days later, I received a call from the store's manager. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "we had a bit of an incident with that clock you donated. It stopped working shortly after we put it on display. Actually, it stopped at 3:33 a.m. Do you know anything about that?" I didn't answer. What could I say? That the clock was cursed? That it somehow sensed death in ways I couldn't understand? Instead, I told him I'd come pick it up. When I arrived, the manager handed me the box with a nervous smile. "To be honest," he said, "I'm glad to see it go. Something about it just gave me the creeps." Back at my apartment, I placed the clock back on the mantel, unsure of what else to do. Over the next several months, the pattern continued. The clock stopped at 3:33 a.m. every time someone died, whether they were strangers halfway across the world or loved ones close to home. Each time, I felt a growing sense of dread, as though the clock was marking not just others' deaths, but perhaps foreshadowing my own. In December of that year, I attended a funeral for a childhood friend who had died unexpectedly in a house fire. As I stood beside her grave, I realized something chilling. The clock hadn't stopped the night she died. At first, I thought maybe it had malfunctioned, but then I remembered what the repairman had said. This clock was built to last. If it hadn't stopped, it meant one thing, and one thing only. The death it was predicting wasn't hers. It was mine. Since that realization, I've lived in constant fear. The clock remains on my mantel. It's ticking, a constant reminder of my mortality. I've tried everything to break the cycle, to destroy it, to sell it, to give it away, but nothing works. It always finds its way back to me, as if it knows I'm the only one who truly understands its purpose. Now, as I write this account, I can hear the clock ticking softly in the background. It's almost midnight, and I know what will happen in a few hours. The hands will freeze at 3:33 a.m., and I'll be left wondering whose death it's announcing this time. Maybe it's someone I know. Maybe it's someone far away. Or maybe, just maybe, it's finally my turn. Whatever happens, I can't escape the feeling that the clock is more than just an object. It's a harbinger, a messenger from someplace beyond our understanding. And until the day it stops for good, I'll live in its shadow, waiting for the inevitable moment when its hands point to my final hour.